Did you watch baseball as a kid?
No, I didn't. I basically got into it last summer when um, my brother-in-law from the UK wanted to do a lot of like kind of American stuff when he was visiting,
Uh-huh.
and we all went to a baseball game, um, and I was like, "Oh, this is actually fun." And, like, I didn't really think of myself as like a professional sports like fan either,
Yeah.
but I was just open to it, and it turned out to be really enjoyable.
Interesting. So, was it your idea to go to a baseball game?
No, it's because um, he just wanted to do like kind of like typical American things while he was here.
Uh-huh.
So baseball being like America's pastime was kind of at the top of the list.
So it was one of his things he wanted to do specifically.
Yeah, yeah, that
Okay.
and like the state fair and,
Yeah.
and stuff like that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, not a bad choice. So what happened for you when you were at this game and realizing that you were having a good time?
That's a good question. I think, well, first of all, kind of just like the atmosphere. It's like when it's like a nice summer day and like you're kind of the energy of the crowd and stuff is like you kind of feed off of that. And it was kind of nice too because last year happened to be a season when the Twins did better than they had maybe in like 20 years.
Nice.
So
Yeah.
it was kind of a good coincidence in that way too.
So how did you start following? Like was it at the beginning of the season? Like how had they already been playing for a while? Where did you
No,
come into the action?
like maybe like a week before I actually went to the game, I started watching some of the games on TV just so I could kind of like uh, sort of understand what was happening.
Right.
And I watched a lot of those, and I just kind of picked stuff up just because the announcers are talking about it, and the games are so long, and there's like time for them to like explain things.
Sure.
They kind of just picked it up via osmosis.
So were you not super familiar with like the rules and the play of baseball before that?
That's right. Yeah, I kind of learned all of that just by watching. Like,
Cool.
like when they said like it's a 2-0 count or stuff like that, I would be like, I'd also be like googling like, what does that mean,
Yeah.
and stuff like, well, just even little things like that. Yeah.
I feel like that's a really good testimony for baseball because I feel like what people who don't like baseball often say is that it's just a bunch of rules and barely anything happens except that like you have to follow all of these procedures and all these like little specific things happen and they don't ever know what's going on. But you were able to pick it up just by jumping in, and that says something to me about the game and its beauty.
Yeah, and it's nice because it has, the games have a good rhythm to them.
Yeah.
I've watched football is probably my second most watched sport, but it's so like chaotic that if there's not as much time for them to like actually talk about what's happening.
Sure.
But baseball, since there's kind of a built-in like steady flow, there's more space for that.
Uh-huh. You can like learn from one pitch to the next how it works.
Exactly. Yeah.
Cool. So you watched on TV and then you went to the ballpark and like the atmosphere must have really done it for you. That's what it sounds like. It sounds like the energy of the crowd was a big factor in that experience.
Yeah. Yeah, and the Twins play at Target Field, which is one of the newest stadiums in the league. Actually, it's like less than 15 years old.
Nice.
So I feel like kind of spoiled in that way. That's like one of the nicest places too.
Yeah. Do you go often now? Like this season, have you gone to a lot of games?
Yeah, I've gone to like 4 so far in the first half of the season. So I try to go to some more. Yeah.
Nice. I don't want to skip ahead, but I'm like tempted to ask you what whether this game and this experience has like a spiritual quality to it because I think of you as somebody who takes great like spiritual delight in the everyday things and I'm wondering if baseball plays into that for you.
Yeah, no, I think it definitely does. And not only that, but I feel like the opposite is also true, where like baseball is also spiritual, but it also like for example, this one time, someone I know from work was asking about like places to go meditate, and he said he didn't want to go to a place where there's like chanting. And I kind of explained like, well, you know, in my view, chanting is kind of normal. And if you think, and I even said like, you know, if you go to a sports game and they chant, like it's just kind of like a human thing.
Totally.
And then that's something we've talked about too, is like, you know, a lot of people like to say baseball is like the most superstitious
yeah.
sport.
Yeah.
And there's so many examples. Like the Twins this season started off really bad, and then all of a sudden they kind of went on this like huge historic win streak. They won like 12 games in a row. And it turned out what the players were doing was they had this like giant preserved summer sausage, and every batter they would like put their hand on it before they went up to hit. And in that span, they had like one of the best offenses in the whole league. So I think, but people often say that's superstitious, but I think it's more interesting to think of that as like a ritual.
Totally. So your position, which I completely share, is not that this is an example of like spiritual guy takes delight in the like pedestrian everyday activities of the marketplace, but rather that baseball is like a profoundly shamanic practice and religious ritual of some kind.
Yeah. I mean, even kind of what we're talking about, like the energy of the crowd, like, I mean, that's kind of powerful just on its own.
Yeah.
And like, how often nowadays do you even have that kind of environment where you know, previous cultures that might have been, you had like certain festivals or something, but sports is kind of our version of that now.
Totally. I love that we've already gone this deep on it. So I did grow up watching baseball. I went to a ton of games as a kid. I played baseball as a kid, and nice. I was obsessed with it actually for periods of time. I like went to baseball camp at Emory, like the college baseball coaches did like a summer camp for kids. And like, you know, I was trying to be an infielder and like really like putting the work in. I only played in school as far as middle school. But that's because already as I was like becoming like a teenager, something was starting to happen to me where like I felt like I had to culturally reject sports culture because it was like barbaric and you know and not spiritual or something. And the thing I think I most often said in those days about why I didn't like it was that it felt militaristic to me, like aggressive and like it was a way of, people say this all the time, like sports in public is like a way of sublimating the like gladiatorial instinct, or like the instinct to war and competition and like crushing your opponents and stuff like that. And I've come to see it as so much more peaceful of a pursuit than that, which is not to say you don't like hate your rival team. So that's sort of what my question is for you, is like what especially as somebody who really started like getting into this game recently, like how did this sense of like rivalry and competition play into the sublime experience of just the game itself?
Yeah, I sort of see it as like, because I kind of also had a similar experience of like when I was in high school, I kind of rejected like team sports. And actually someone jokingly said in high school that I should have won the least school spirit award or something like that. But I kind of see it as like just not hiding, like not isolating yourself. Kind of like taking part in the good and the bad, and trying to make things better. But there also something too, like when, like maybe I wouldn't have said it explicitly before, but maybe I had a background assumption that like sports fans are all kind of the same. But when I started going to games, like you really see that's not true. Like there's all kinds of people, all ages, all any category you can think of. Like there's tons of fans. Actually, I don't know if I've shown it to you, but I went to a Hello Kitty bobblehead night
Oh, nice.
at the Twins game,
Yeah.
and there were tons of people, just like young people, like Hello Kitty clothes, hats, like everything, who were there. And it's like, oh yeah, I probably wouldn't have assumed that would be the case. Yeah.
You know, I once went to a game in Japan to a
cool.
to a like a pro game, like a big game.
Yeah.
And it was in Hiroshima. But the Giants from Tokyo were there. It was oh God. And so like Hiroshima was the home team, right? And Hiroshima,
That carp, right?
yeah. And Hiroshima is obviously a place with pretty powerful local pride and spirit, right? Like what they've been through as a city to like completely physically rebuild the entire place. And like I was a teenager. So I was actually kind of in the throes of my like I hate sports thing, but I was also in the throes of my I love Japan thing. So it was sort of a wash, right? And I could not believe how cool it was to observe the way that like Japanese baseball and American baseball were the same but also different as just like expressions of place. Right?
Yeah.
And that's sort of like the Hello Kitty thing reminded me of the Japan thing, but also I feel like what you're saying is like Twins people have some sort of local spirit that you feel part of.
Yeah, and that's the other thing even if I wasn't a huge like sports fan, you just hear in the background like the kind of legendary players like Kirby Puckett for the Twins or Joe Mauer, especially because there's a lot of kind of homegrown talent too.
Yeah.
And it's probably true to some extent for most teams, but those
are
the ones
the fun part, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Joe Mauer grew up, I don't know, 5 miles from Target Field, maybe less. Yeah. And he was just inducted into the Hall of Fame this past weekend.
Nice. Yeah. It's inextricable from place to me, but that brings me back to the rivalry thing. Like you never have struck me as like a particularly rivalrous or aggressive person. So like, what does it mean to you to oppose a team?
I guess maybe it's kind of like a safe outlet for it. Maybe, because the Twins right now have kind of a rivalry against Cleveland, and the Yankees kind of have been thrashing us lately.
Yeah.
So I guess it's kind of fun to be like, Cleveland, but at the end of the day, it's not that serious. Yeah. So it's kind of safe.
I don't remember your history of living other places. Have you lived in very many places?
Only for like a few months at a time, but yeah, otherwise it's all been in the Twin Cities area.
Yeah, cool. Because the reason I ask is because my relationship to the cities I've lived in and their teams is pretty interesting. Like being an NL East person, like the Phillies are like, especially currently, like they're the team to beat, and they're the team we should be beating, and so forth. But like I lived in Philly for a year. My wife is from Philly, and so it's more complicated than just like I hate the Phillies, right? It's like there's sort of this alternative history where I like stayed there, and I had to think about that every time they come up. I wonder what your experiences of other places and their teams like. Do you think of the place like I don't know? Do you have a relationship to the other places like you do to the place that you're from?
Kind of a little bit. I kind of liked the Arizona Diamondbacks when I was a kid because I still have a ton of extended family in Arizona, so we'd go out there a lot. And I think a lot of it when I was a kid is just because like Randy Johnson was like a really good player. Sure. He was back then. He was probably like one of the 3 players I could name.
So, yeah.
And then I was in Colorado for a little bit of time, but the Rockies are pretty terrible. So not a huge rivalry there.
Bringing up Randy Johnson though makes me realize we haven't talked really about positions yet. And there's like an
Yeah.
experience that I've had of like certain positions are like more resonant for me than others. Like I like center fielders. Like center fielders are my favorite for some reason. And like Randy Johnson, you know, is like one of those pitchers that like just everyone knows who he is just because of how hard he can throw a baseball, right? Like do you gravitate towards certain positions? And are there reasons?
I don't think I graduate to certain positions. More about the individuals. But I do like that baseball has such a. Well, we were talking about kind of like diversity, but even just like diversity of like athletic and body types of players is huge. Maybe more than most other sports.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I think that's really interesting. But when it comes to like positions, it's more about like the individual player. And that's another thing I was kind of appreciating when I started becoming a fan is like, it sounds cliche, but like when you learn about the struggles the players go through and like how they, you know, almost none of them have like a smooth like path to being good.
Yeah.
And like, it sounds like, I joke about like I'm becoming like more simple-minded, but it's like, oh, it's actually really inspiring that this guy like totally transformed his like technique or his like workout regimen or something and became like he went from being like kind of mediocre to like one of the better players.
Yeah.
I think that's really cool, actually.
Yeah, I love those too. There's also, I mean, I think soccer is like this too, but like the story of like traveling up the ranks of professional, like amateur to professional and like the various levels of professional play and like being in the minors and then getting called up and, you know, that dramatic moment. Like we've got a guy, Nacho Alvarez, that just made his debut because like everybody's getting injured on the Braves right now. And he got his first major league hit today. And it was like, and the crowd went crazy, right? Like it was like a single up the middle, but like everybody went nuts. And then like they interviewed his family in the stands, and they were like, "How what was it like to see his first hit?" I just like
the parents were crying.
Probably. Yeah, they were crying.
Yeah.
Like there is something. I mean, it's a rite of passage for a kid to grow up playing baseball and like wanting to be a professional baseball player. You know, like of the tiny fraction of people who make it, like the ones who did, like. They've been chosen for their destiny.
Yeah. And maybe it's kind of like a quirk of my own psychology, but I kind of always have like struggled with the idea that like working too much on yourself is selfish. But kind of watching players, you see that when they do that, it's really not like they're not the only ones who benefit from it. You know, like we have this one player named Royce Lewis who's a really good hitter, and there's just something like even when he's hitting well, it's not just him. It kind of like all the other players like see that and they start hitting well too. You know?
Yeah, it's so interesting how we identify with the, you know, the number of people on the field at a time, right? Like there's 9 people out. And then, you know, one at a time, the other team comes up to the plate and like their name and their face are up there, like their characters, but they're also, there's like enough space for them to be human beings.
Yeah. I think that's another unique thing too, is that like in the individual moment, like each one player is like kind of does everything, but because the games are so long and the seasons are so long that it's really like a collective too. You know, and most players don't even play every game either.
Do you think that you'll watch baseball for the rest of your life?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I kind of actually, the through line for a lot of my hobbies is I like doing things that I think I could do forever. Like knitting or like bird watching, like kind of stereotypical elder year hobbies, which is I think kind of why I like them. Yeah. What about you?
Oh yeah, I think that it's what I've learned in the last couple of years watching the Braves after sort of coming back to it for like just, I don't know, reasons that are so complex that I feel like I'm spending this whole month of Tiger Time trying to figure out. what I've figured out about myself is that the period of time where I thought sports was bad was an aberration. I was like repressing something, and like all these things we've talked about, I think are like part of like grounding me in the rest of humanity.
Yeah, yeah. The grounding in humanity, I think that's a big aspect for me too. I mean, just the fact that like, aside from like the weather, it's like one of the easiest things you can like talk to someone you like kind of know, but don't know super well. I like that part of it too.